Hello, anatomy friends. This is Dr. Alsop, and in this video, we will be discussing the very basics of the autonomic nervous system. So, this will be the basics. What is the autonomic nervous system and its two major divisions? This is a really complicated area, and this video will provide the building blocks for more complicated discussions later in the curriculum that will revolve around the ANS. All right, the autonomic nervous system controls or modifies involuntary effects or actions. So this system has fibers that are visceral, efferent, or motor. So these motor fibers stimulate smooth muscle, such as what you find in the gut tube or blood vessels, cardiac muscle, as well as glandular cells. And these fibers and associated ganglia of the autonomic nervous system are divided into two major divisions. The sympathetic nervous system is often referred to as the fight or flight system. You may have heard that before. Whereas the parasympathetic division is often referred to as the rest and digest. And so this describes some of the major functions of these divisions. Now, unlike somatic motor and sensory innervation, where the passage of impulses between the central nervous system and the effector organ or sensory ending involves a single neuron. So that's highlighted in this image on the bottom left here. What's different with the autonomic nervous system is both divisions of the autonomic nervous system involve a two-neuron system. All right, so both sympathetics and parasympathetic. So the nerve cell body of the preganglionic neuron is going to be located in gray matter of the central nervous system. So illustrated in this upper right-hand corner image, the cell body is located in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. Its fiber will synapse only on the cell body located in a ganglion of a postganglionic neuron. So that will be the second neuron in the series. And then from there, those fibers will terminate on the actual effector organ, so the smooth muscle or the cardiac muscle or the glands. So key here is when you're thinking autonomic nervous system, you need to be thinking of a two-neuron chain. Before we move into specifics of the divisions, I did want to mention visceral afferent or sensory fibers. The autonomic nervous system is a motor system and only a motor system. It is not sensory. So these visceral afferent fibers are not officially part of the ANS, but they do accompany the fibers of the ANS and will carry signals from organs to the central nervous system. Another system or division that I want to introduce is the enteric nervous system, or the ENS, because it is sometimes considered a part of the autonomic nervous system or sometimes considered individually. Now, the enteric nervous system is a complex network of ganglia and nerve fibers that are associated with the walls of the gastrointestinal tract. Now, people consider this system independently because of its relatively limited coverage of the abdominal viscera, but it's also considered individually because of its complexity and its ability to function autonomously without connection to the central nervous system. It's kind of sometimes thought of as second brain because of how complex and how much it can integrate information. So we will consider the enteric nervous system in more detail in block 4. Now, as you can imagine, the autonomic nervous system and its parts have tremendous clinical correlations. But I do want to highlight here, as you are also being introduced to pharmacological topics in this block, that pharmacologic agents can selectively activate or block receptors associated with the autonomic nervous system. And some drugs can even mimic the actions of the autonomic nervous system. So there is a key relationship between autonomic nervous system and pharmacology. And you will get into some of these details over the next few weeks. All right, let's get into the basics of the sympathetic nervous system. And mainly we're going to focus on the ways that we can differentiate it from the parasympathetic division. So I have put the simplest or most basic of the major functions of the sympathetic nervous system. And it would be that it sends signals to prepare the body or body parts for action. Is it more complicated than that? Absolutely. But as mentioned, we are starting big picture and we will add detail in throughout the year. One of the biggest differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions is the distribution of fibers. Sympathetics are widespread. One of the major things that sympathetics do is affect the smooth muscle and blood vessels. And as we know, blood vessels are everywhere, so distribution is wide. That is not going to be the case with parasympathetics. Now, while you sometimes hear sympathetics referred to as the fight or flight system, you may also hear it referred to as the thoracolumbar division because of where these fibers originate. And they're going to originate in the gray matter of the T1 through L2 spinal cord segments. That is the only place in the whole body it originates, but from there it spreads widely. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens a bit later in the curriculum. Now, those preganglionic fibers, so the part of that first neuron, are relatively short, and they release acetylcholine, which is going to stimulate those postganglionic neurons. The postganglionic fibers are relatively long. And most will release norepinephrine, although some do release acetylcholine, such as those neurons that innervate sweat glands and some blood vessels and skeletal muscle. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to go with what the majority does, and that's going to be release norepinephrine. So as mentioned, many of the actions of the sympathetic nervous system are to prepare the body for action. So some of the major effects are, and this isn't a complete list, but some of these major effects are constricting blood vessels or vasoconstriction to organs that are not involved with combating stress. So that would be things like the kidneys and the gastrointestinal tract. It will constrict the blood vessels that supply that. Conversely, it will vasodilate the blood vessels supplying organs that are involved in increased activity, such as the heart and the blood vessels that supply skeletal muscle. Sympathetics will also increase the heart and respiratory rates. It will increase the diameter of the airway or bronchodilation. It will cause the pupils to dilate or get bigger. It will increase blood glucose after glycogen is converted into glucose. And lastly, sympathetics will also stimulate sweat glands to secrete, so it will cause sweat. All right, now let's move on to parasympathetics. This system is going to serve in broadest terms to conserve as well as restore body energy. Now, compared to the sympathetic nervous system, its distribution is relatively limited. You do not have parasympathetics in the limbs. You don't need it there. It is relatively limited specifically to the head. It's going to play a role in terms of the viscera of the thorax, the abdomen, and the pelvis. But importantly, it's not affecting the smooth muscle of blood vessels like the sympathetics, so distribution doesn't have to be as wide. The parasympathetic division is considered the craniosacral division based on where these fibers originate. So they either originate in the nuclei of specific cranial nerves. One of the biggest ones we're going to talk about this year is cranial nerve 10 or the vagus nerve, but you'll also have it in other cranial nerves. And parasympathetics will also originate in the gray matter of the spinal cord segments, the sacral spinal cord segments S2 through S4. Both pre and post-ganglionic fibers are going to release acetylcholine. And their fiber lengths are generally the opposite of what we discussed for the sympathetics, with the preganglionic fibers being relatively long and the postganglionic fibers being relatively short. With the relatively smaller distribution that correlates with those many functions of the sympathetics, if you're comparing them to the sympathetics, you're going to have less functions associated with parasympathetics. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but The parasympathetics will play a role in terms of decreasing the heart and respiratory rate. It will decrease the diameter of the airway, or it will bronchoconstrict. Importantly, parasympathetics will increase GI or gastrointestinal motility as well as secretion. So this is the digest part of the rest and digest. Also, parasympathetics will promote glandular secretion. So this is important in digestion as well when you're considering the salivary glands. And lastly, the parasympathetics will play a role in terms of pupil constriction. So the opposite of the sympathetics there. All right, excellent. We have reached the summary slide. I have made a nice and concise table over here that describes much of what we have talked about. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I do feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.